Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. And welcome to today's Information Week webinar, Innovation in Cyber Resiliency, sponsored by NetSPI and broadcast by Informa. I'm Brandon Taylor with Information Week, and I'll be your moderator today. We have just a few announcements before we begin. This webinar is designed to be interactive. The dock of widgets at the bottom of your screen will allow you to learn about today's speakers, download resources, share this webinar via social media outlets, and participate in the Q&A session that takes place at the end of our presentation. The slides will advance automatically throughout the event. You may also download content materials via the resources widget. Toward the end of our webinar, we will ask you all to provide feedback via the survey widget found at the bottom of your screen. Please take a minute to fill this out before leaving us today, as your feedback will provide us with valuable information on how we can improve future events. Lastly, if you are experiencing any technical problems, please click the help widget found at the bottom of your screen, or type your issue into the Q&A window, and we will be glad to offer one-on-one assistance. Now on to the presentation, Innovation in Cyber Resiliency. Discussing today's topic is Rob Farrell, AVP and Chief Information Security Officer at the University of Alabama at Birmingham, Nabil Hanan, who is the Field Chief Information Security Officer at NetSPI, and also Philip Kemp, who is the Cybersecurity Strategist, VP of Cybersecurity at VLCM. Again, if you would like to learn more about our speakers today, you can find their bios in the speaker bio window on your screen. And again, if you would like to ask any of our speakers questions, please use the Q&A window in the middle of your screen. And Rob, over to you.
All right, thanks, Brandon. Appreciate that intro. So I want to talk a little bit today about innovation and cyber resiliency. Before I get started, I do want to mention I'll probably stay a little bit generic when I talk about some of the tools or technologies that we use in my current organization. But if anybody wants to know specifics afterwards, I'm happy to share either through email or LinkedIn. You can hit me up there, and I'll be happy to share those details. Let's go ahead and get started. So resilient, the definition there is able to withstand or recover quickly from difficult conditions. So I want to share a quick case study with you all about an incident that happened in my organization and how we handled that, and just kind of what went down, so y'all can kind of learn from what we went through and hopefully pick up a few things that can help your organization as well. So I'll go through that case study, and then towards the end, I'll talk about some of the tools that can help with integrating security into development workflows, and how those can be prioritized in different deployment styles, and then some of the security practices that might impact those decisions. So let's go ahead and get started, and I'll talk about the case study. So when COVID hit, man, I can't believe it's been so long since that started back in 2020. But as COVID began and we all sort of went home at the very beginning, we kind of got forced into a new normal. So this remote workforce became something that many of us had done sporadically, but not on a large scale. And so we quickly had to learn how to scale up and being able to support remote users, whether that was an expanded VPN infrastructure, or one of the things that we came up with was an expanded virtual desktop capability for our students and faculty and staff to be able to get onto a virtual desktop from home. And so I'm going to explain how that happened and kind of some of the consequences that we found from doing that quickly and sort of in an innovative way, in the vein of innovation, how that can come back to bite you. Okay, so there's a temptation to settle, if you will, when you're under a time crunch, when you're facing pressure to get something done. And so as the pandemic emerged, it became evident to us that we quickly needed this virtual desktop environment to be able to allow our constituents, our customers, to be able to work from home. And this VDI solution that we stood up as a cloud-based solution for students and faculty and staff to be able to get a desktop just like they were sitting in their office, but from their house. And so as we began that implementation, we had a small footprint of that, but it wasn't large. And so as we began to expand it, we recognized that one of the major controls that is needed in a situation like that is two-factor authentication. As we got going with the implementation, there was some sort of a technical problem where the 2FA wasn't working. And as it got down to crunch time, if you will, the leadership made the decision to go forward with the VDI offering without 2FA because we weren't able to get it functioning right there at the beginning. So that is when I talk about the temptation to settle, that's kind of the thing that came back to bite us from not having 2FA, because it's such a critical control. Without two-factor authentication, you're basically allowing anyone to get on a VDI on your network with a username and a password. And as we all know, phishing has allowed credential theft to be quite prevalent in our day. And so this turned out to be a big problem for us when one of our students, actually a couple of students' accounts were compromised through a phishing campaign. And international attackers now had a desktop VDI on our network. So this activity went undetected for a number of weeks before our MSSP, our managed security services provider, was able to pick up on some activity and notified us. So Walt Disney has a great quote here about getting started is, the best way to get started is to quit talking and begin doing. However, I will say to add on to that, be sure that the proper controls are in place before going to production, like two-factor authentication, because it's pretty important. So during the pandemic, one of the security tools that our team had implemented but had not completed the implementation was an EDR, or an endpoint detection and response tool. And I would say this was around the summer time frame after the pandemic started. Well, as our VDI environment got going, we recognized that the EDR deployment needed to happen quicker. We needed to expedite the rollout of that tool across our enterprise. So we got that deployed. And I will say, if those of you who don't have EDR or don't have a managed security services provider, one of the components that they offer in a tool like that is a monitoring component, where they will look at your logs 24/7 by 365 and let you know, or if you have a SOC, they'll let your SOC know, or if you just have someone in security, they'll keep them up to date on any potential incidents that are going on. And so for us, that turned out to be the saving grace of what became a notification to us on a holiday. For my team, pre EDR, we were basically 8 to 5, Monday to Friday, maybe a little bit outside of that, but we were not a 24/7 SOC. And so to have this 24/7 monitoring capability, that was a huge win for us. And as it turns out, we weren't working on a particular Monday in January because it was a holiday. It was actually Martin Luther King Day when this happened. And so our SOC got notification on this holiday that they were hoping to have a nice day off at home that turned into a not so great day. But they got notified that there was some malicious activity on our network. It was found on a conference room computer, and it needed our immediate attention. So here's kind of a quick highlight or a timeline of what happened. The notification that we got on that holiday in January, it indicated that a computer in one of our conference rooms had utilized a tool called PS Exec. I'm sure many of you have heard of that or used it. And they were using PS Exec to perform reconnaissance and to dump user credentials on two of the other computers in that department. The attackers had cracked the credentials of that conference room computer, which included a local administrator account. And that account had admin rights to all of the computers in that department. So that sort of exacerbated the issue for us. So further detail we got from this EDR vendor let us know that they had discovered similar activity a few days prior. So in essence, they should have notified us a few days before this that some really bad stuff was going on. But as it turned out, it was MLK Day, and we were thankful to have that notification, because if it hadn't been for them, we would not have seen it, particularly on that holiday when there was a lot of malicious things going on. And I'm going to get into some of those details to show you what happened. But the vendor, the EDR vendor, let us know that the source of this activity was coming from a conference room computer in one of our departments. So that's the exploitation phase that you see there. And then under the identification piece, they found that there was a backdoor installed. There are many tools that are used by help desk departments to help support their users. And this particular tool is a remote control, almost like a remote desktop product. Some of you have probably heard of it or used it before. It's called AnyDesk. And AnyDesk is not a tool that is used by our help desk. So we knew that when we found AnyDesk on these computers that had been compromised, that was being used as a backdoor to get into our network. So now the attackers did not have to go through that VDI to get into our network. They had a direct connection to these computers that had AnyDesk running. So that was another big find as part of this investigation of this incident. One thing I will say, we had a third-party forensics or incident response vendor that helped us through this incident. So we had, almost immediately contacted them. And the important thing to remember here, as it relates to cyber insurance, I'm sure that many of you have cyber insurance and you deal with that on a daily basis. But I know for us, our insurance carriers only approve certain vendors for us to use in a situation like this. So if you happen to use a different vendor that's not on their pre-approved list, you may not get reimbursed from an insurance standpoint for the activities or the expenses that are involved in recovering from an incident like this. So keep that in mind. There's a real impetus upon us to have these pre-approved vendors ready to go, all of the contractual stuff done ahead of time, so that when you do have an incident, you're ready to invoke their support and to help you recover. And they helped us tremendously through this. So here's the timeline. After we got the logs reviewed from the incident, you can see all the way back on December the 8th was the first known login from one of these compromised student accounts from an attacker they had logged into our VDI farm from a California-based IP address. The next day, we saw them log into our farm from an IP based in the Netherlands. So that's when the international aspect came into it. And you can see from the legend down there, the yellow circles are actually scanning activity. So when it says the Kerberos ticket request happened right there on the 9th, that was actually a Kerberosting type of attack where they were scanning for Kerberos tickets that could be used in a Kerberosting type of attack. And I'll go into more detail on that. If y'all are not familiar with that, I can elaborate more on Kerberosting offline, but it's easily searchable for you to figure out what Kerberosting is. And it's actually an older attack that is mitigated quite easily from turning off some legacy things in your environment that really shouldn't be turned on anymore. And that's what we ended up doing. So on the 12th of December, you can see this account was used again to log in from this Netherlands-based IP address. And then there's a long break, like almost 2 weeks there. They went from the 12th until the 26th with no activity. We didn't see anything from them. I guess maybe they took a Christmas break. I don't know. It's hard to say for sure. But we saw another login again on the 26th, and then another long break of inactivity all the way till January the 13th. And you can see there on the 13th, they logged into our farm from an IP address based in France. So these IPs that are logging into our VDI farm have now come from a France-based IP, a Netherlands-based IP, and one in California. So it's spread all over the world as to where they're coming at us. So what happened after that, you can kind of see we transitioned to the 14th of January, the next day. This is when it really kicked up. They're starting there early in the morning, 3:54 a.m. This Netherlands-based IP logs in. We see a Kerberos ticket. Now we're seeing at 4 a.m. some PowerShell execution. PowerShell is a Windows built-in component that a lot of attackers use today to execute malicious code on incidents and compromised situations. And then at 4:03, you can see there is an outbound connection to a fastly.com address. And Fastly is just a hosting provider, but what was actually hosted there was some tools that they were executing over the internet instead of downloading it locally where it might get detected on a desktop. They actually executed it from the internet so that they were more likely to fly under the radar. And then at 4:07, you see they created some folders on this machine they were on. We see some more of the Kerberos activity. And then later on there at 4:41 a.m., you can see where they set that AnyDesk service to start automatically when the machine rebooted so that they would have their back door and be able to get back in. Again, that morning, we're seeing another IP address. This is a Germany-based IP, and I'm putting the IP. Those are the real IPs that actually hit us there. So if any of y'all have seen activity from those IP addresses, you might want to look closer. That's what we would call an indicator of attack or an indicator of compromise. Those are the real IPs that hit us. So you're welcome to utilize that. So on the morning of the 14th at 10:08, we see they downloaded PS Tools, and that is where the suite of products come from that you would find PS Exec inside the PS Tools suite of products there. They also ran Nmap to scan the network, and they did an RDP scan looking for machines across our network that were running the remote desktop protocol or RDP. They also added a user to a local administrator group that morning. And then you can see a little later on there at 10:34 that morning, there is a tool being used called Mimikatz. If y'all are not familiar with Mimikatz, it is a very prominent tool in the hacking community. And you can see the next event that happened right after that was a pass the hash attempt. Well, Mimikatz is a tool that you can use to pass the hash. When I say pass the hash, I'm talking about it's a hash of an authentication process where they can log in with just that hash and not have to know the username and password. So that's a prominent hacker tool and attempted login to several different things using that tool that many people have seen in incidents before. And then again, we see that German IP connected again later that day at 4:50 in the afternoon. So following the timeline here, again, this is the 18th of January. So 4 days after all that activity that we had just noted on the last slide, we get notified by the EDR vendor. Truly, we should have been notified 4 days prior, but we're thankful to have been notified on this day, because that's when we really cranked up the process for getting our third-party forensics and incident response company on board to help us. At 6:43 that morning, our SOC director was notified of the seriousness of this situation, and we had pretty much all hands on deck that entire week. Before I speak to the rest of this slide, I'll tell you this. The holiday, the Martin Luther King Day, was on a Monday. So by Friday of that week, the vendor, the third-party forensics vendor, had been through many of these similar circumstances, and they told us that in 99 out of 100 cases, these ransomware type actors will execute their malicious ransomware type of code, the encryption protocols or the wiper malware, whatever it is they're going to execute. They'll do that on a Friday night or early on a Saturday morning. So that Friday night, my team was, all night, all hands on deck, watching logs, looking for activity. So it was like a war room pretty much. And we were just waiting for something to happen. And fortunately, nothing ever happened. We didn't have that ransomware or that wiper type of malware get executed in our environment. And I think it's because we had such great wisdom from this third party that helped us to eradicate them from our environment. And I'm going to go through some steps that we took to do that in just a second. But as you can see on the 18th, there's the AnyDesk execution there at 7:10. We saw some obfuscated PowerShell, which is another a big red flag, and then some PowerShell execution, including Mimikatz, that they had used a PowerShell to execute that. Some net user commands, some psexec, more PowerShell, more outbound connections to that fastly.com address. And then at 9:42 that morning, you see that they copied some registry hives to a downloads folder. And we think that was so that they could take that and try to crack more of the user type passwords that they got, of the user credentials that they got from those registry hives, and do some offline cracking. So that's kind of the timeline of what happened. So here are the steps that we took to eradicate the attackers. First thing, we locked the accounts that were being used by the attackers. There were multiple student accounts that had been compromised. We added the AnyDesk application to a block list in our EDR tools. So if it happened to have been installed anywhere else in our environment that we didn't know about, our EDR tool would block that. We also blocked the subnet ranges for those international IPs that were involved. We implemented 2FA on the VDI farm, which should have been done to begin with. We installed the EDR tool on our gold image for the farm as well as other cloud systems, so that that the endpoint detection and response could be all throughout all of our environments. We had another department on campus that also had their own VDI farm. We requested them to install two-factor, which they did. We disabled NTLM v1 and also the RC4. Both of these are legacy protocols that really should not be running in any environment anymore. And the RC4 encryption protocol is what allowed the Kerberoasting attack to be possible. So make sure that's not running in your environment. We also expedited the implementation of two-factor authentication on our legacy VPN prior to its decommission, and we reduced the number of domain admin accounts because the fewer number of people that have domain admin, or the number of accounts that are in that group, the less your risk is going to be from a serious compromise. So we also did some increased monitoring. We purchased an identity tool to help monitor better, and this tool allowed us to create some reports that helped us look at things like sensitive groups within Active Directory that get modified. We would get daily reports if there was any change to the server admins or domain admins or backup users, groups that have higher level privileges. We would look for any mods to those groups to get notifications. Also looked for lateral movement paths to sensitive accounts that would help us determine if there was an attacker in that was doing some nefarious things. We also set up some daily alerts from our SIM tool related to the incident particulars. And what I mean by that is, since we had 2 known student accounts compromised, we set up a report to give us any failed logins for those accounts, and all of the all of the daily logs for those 2 accounts. Also, we set up a report or a notification to if there were any excessive failed logins where that was greater than a certain threshold. Any new Active Directory groups that were created, we set up an alert for that. We also looked at a feature that could send VDI logs to our SIM, because previously we did not have those logs coming to our SIM. So we looked at that capability. Then we also enabled some additional configuration options within the EDR tool that that were not turned on previously. For example, there's a capability in that tool, the one that we had running, that would detect an interactive threat. So if somebody had a shell, it would detect that and give us an alert. It would notify us. One of the settings that we turned on was something called cross process and command script detection. So that was detecting, if you remember earlier, I said something about PowerShell and how it can be used to invoke lots of things. So this command script detection would be these malicious PowerShell type things going on. We also set up the anti-tampering for that agent so that someone couldn't turn it off and execute malicious things on that machine. And then we locked down administrative access to the admin console for that tool as well. So it was already locked, but we locked it down tighter, putting more scrutiny on that. So enhancing our future, we acquired several tools since that incident. We've got now a threat intelligence feed, advanced email security, which we didn't have before. Even though it was kind of coming down the road, we just hadn't purchased it and procured it. And now that's in place. And we've got a data classification, sort of like a DLP type capability now. We have attack surface management, and we have SOAR, which is orchestration and automation. We also implemented more segmentation wherever possible, and then anything else we could think of to harden the environment. So that's kind of the incident that happened. We learned lots of lessons, and I'll be happy to take any questions later. But just to wrap up here, I wanted to share just a few things that can help to identify vulnerabilities and integrate into workflows. So we do vulnerability scans on our network. We also do penetration testing. We have a couple of folks on our team that do internal pen testing, and we also hire a third party to do annual penetration testing on our network. But these application scanners, I've got a couple of acronyms there that are listed called SAST and DAST. That's static and dynamic application security testing. These types of things will not only help you identify vulnerabilities in your code, but also allows your developers to include security before they go live to production with an app or even just a code change. So these types of things are really important to get baked in at the front of your projects, because most of us in security know that a lot of times we are an afterthought when it comes to projects. So getting our processes baked in early on is really important. And this attack surface thing, I mentioned earlier that we had acquired an attack surface tool. Gartner actually calls it a CASM, or a cyber attack surface management capability. So we did acquire, have utilized it greatly to be able to see such a wonderful picture of our assets and have a true asset management picture going on. Also, there are traditional tools that can help with that. Microsoft has their SCCM that's kind of a CMDB, or a configuration management database. But also there are help desk tools that have CMDBs kind of baked in that allow you to keep track of all your IT assets. And that's crucial to, you can't protect what you don't know about. So it's crucial to have asset management. Also the first two controls on the SANS top 20 list of controls. So very important. And I mentioned this already, but getting baked in from the beginning is crucial. Also, from my lesson learned, hold your ground on security controls that are a must-have. You've got to have two-factor authentication. It's a must today. So, in summary, innovation is necessary, often necessary, but should not be done at the expense of proper security controls. And I thank y'all for your time today. And I think we'll take some questions at the end. But right now, I'm going to turn it over to Nabil.
Rob, thank you so much. Hope you guys can hear me okay. Give me a thumbs up or something so I know that you can hear me fine. Yeah. Thank you for that. It was actually very insightful to learn from you all the different steps that you have to take. And what I really enjoyed, Rob, is the way you presented your timeline of events and all the different actions that were taken. I feel like we'll tie it back to how proactively trying to secure your infrastructure and your ecosystem is really important, and would love to share more about kind of innovation and cyber resiliency work that Valcom and NetSPI have been partnering on today. So excited to talk more about that. Before I get too ahead of myself, let's do some quick introductions. So I want to maybe Philip, do you want to introduce yourself first, and then I'll go next, and we can continue the discussion?
Yeah, sure. I'm Philip Kemp, cybersecurity strategist at Valcom. I lead our cybersecurity practice, and that comes with making sure we have the right partners and offerings for our client, as well as working with our clients to help them with their cybersecurity journey.
Thanks, Philip. And I'm Nabil Hannan. I work as the field CISO at NetSPI. I've been in the industry working in cybersecurity now for over 17 years, working with organizations of various sizes, be more resilient and be protected from potential attacks and breaches. At NetSPI, we are one of the global leaders in offensive security testing. We work on various types of offerings ranging from pen testing of systems, anything really that has software on it. So web applications, mobile applications, IoT devices, and so on. We'll talk about the different types of pen testing as well. And also we do a lot of work in the attack surface management space. So we'll talk a little bit about that piece too. To get us started, at NetSPI, we are a company that has been building our pedigree in the manual pen testing space. And I really enjoyed Rob's presentation from the perspective of understanding the anatomy of an attack end to end and how it is really executed. As you could tell from his story about the overall breach that happened, it wasn't one tool that an attacker ran and then found an issue. It also wasn't the fact where someone was able to come and do the same thing over and over again and breach everything. There was a method to the madness there where the attacker had to truly come in, understand the environment, understand the context of the business that they were infiltrating, understand how to go and pivot from system to system, understand what type of tools to run when, and what type of software or malware or things to install in the systems at what time. And all of that just cannot be automated. You don't have a one-size-fits-all solution that can go and show you how an end-to-end breach would happen. So we at NetSPI, we focus on various different types of pen testing with a heavy focus on the manual stuff. So our humans leverage technology and leverage scanners to be able to find as many weaknesses in an ecosystem as quickly as they can, and then use the human intuition and human understanding of the context of the systems we're testing to be able to dig deeper and farther down into the environment and figure out how resilient your environment really is, whether it be the software, the network, the VDI, or so on. So we are actually working and innovating in various different types of pen testing. They range all the way from application, so testing the app itself to find flaws in them, testing the actual network, whether it be what's your external facing network versus what's your internal network, how things are segmented, and if there's a possibility to pivot from one area to the other. In recent years, with no surprise, cloud has been adopted across the industry. So we're testing cloud environments, both from actual escalations to config reviews. We also, highly recognize that a big vulnerable part of any organization is the people. Attackers try to leverage the human element and the human weakness to try and breach organizations. So we do a lot of social engineering, red teaming, which are more objective driven, where we come in with a certain objective and try to figure out how to accomplish that objective within a reasonable time frame. And then, I kind of like to encompass IoT as really anything that's running software or anything that's running code on a microprocessor, whether it's a ATM, a voting machine, a mobile device, a lottery machine, or so on. We can test those, and we have been innovating in the methodology and how we approach testing those systems as well. At NetSPI, we've also worked on developing an attack surface management solution. It's one of the industry-leading solutions we have today. And as Rob mentioned, an ASM solution really, it is twofold. It allows you to truly get a picture of your internet-facing perimeter and understand what assets you have exposed to the internet. If you think of it from an attacker's perspective, when they're trying to breach into an organization, where they start is what they can see externally. And if they see things that are more vulnerable, that are internet-facing, that's typically where they would start their attacks. So it's important to have a solution that's giving you 24/7, 365 days a year, visibility into what your attack surface looks like, changes that's happening in your environment and ecosystem in real time, and then also give you access to potential exposures that an attacker may try to infiltrate. So that's why the attack surface management solutions are really great. And in our attack surface management solution, we also go beyond that. We actually have humans that then take those exposures and test against them to try and make sure we report to you things that are truly exploitable with steps to reproduce, so your teams can go and understand how to replicate that issue and also how to fix that issue as quickly as possible. So would love to learn more from you, Philip, on the type of things you're doing at Valcom. Valcom and NetSPI, we're partners, and we do work together on various of these pen testing engagements and other engagements. But Philip, can you share a little bit more about what you guys are doing in the space from an innovation and resilience perspective?
Yeah. Well, and I want to touch base on a couple of the things you said. So attack surface management. If I look back at my career, all of the breaches and compromises that I've been involved with, predominantly those have started with systems that were things we didn't know about, and the systems that we did not know about, or customers did not know about, are the systems that generally have the less protection. They kind of skirt under the radar, and an attacker is more easily able to get a foothold there. So certainly knowing what your attack surface looks like is a critical step in being able to protect it. The other thing I wanted to share is, so a lot of our clients have used NetSPI penetration testing, and more than just mimicking, well, certainly all of the engagements mimic what a formidable attacker would do. But one other aspect that has been valuable, especially to our more mature clients, is being able to test their detection capabilities. So they're able to, and you guys have some special offerings, right, around like MITRE testing of certain preventative tools, or purple teaming, where their SOCs are able to see what the attacks look like and determine, did they even see anything? Did they even detect it? So a lot more than just the preventative, but being able to dig into those aspects of cyber resiliency that Rob talked about, the recovering and the responding to attacks, and pen testing has been very, very valuable in that space.
Yeah, and in the attack surface management space too, it's more important today than ever before because of the adoption of cloud and because of the adoption of the faster DevSecOps process and CI/CD pipelines of things going online and offline at a rapid pace. There's a lot of unknowns that happen in an organization where new assets are popping up every day. Assets are shifting from one location to another location. And that's why, it's good to know a customer of ours put it very nicely for me. He said, it's important for me to know my unknowns, and the unknown unknowns are what I care about the most, because I have a blind spot in that area where I need to focus. And Philip, you're right. We also have our breach and attack simulation offering, where we can come in and test your detective controls. We can run TTPs specific to what you care about, and then you can determine whether you're able to detect something, whether you're partially detecting something, whether you're not detecting something at all. And one of the stories I really enjoy from our experience of doing this is, we find many organizations will pay a lot of money to buy software that's supposed to protect them from certain types of breaches. They deploy it, but most of them end up disabling the rules because it adds too much of a burden on performance, and then they forget that they turned it off. And so you have investment in all of these technologies that are supposed to protect you, but then they're actually not being effective at all. We run into that pretty often.
Oh yeah, I can't tell you how many times I've seen tools that get 10% of the way implemented, or in troubleshooting, someone puts a permit any as the last line of their firewall rule and forgets to take it off months later. And sometimes with bad results. But just a little bit about Valcom. We're a technology solutions provider headquartered in Salt Lake City, Utah. This is our 40th year in business. We have a national footprint, sell to customers in all 50 states. I lead our cybersecurity practice, but we have engineering groups in all various areas, whether it be data center, Microsoft, or network engineering and other areas. We take a consultative approach with experienced engineers. In my case, I got involved with IT in the late 90s. In 2000, I decided to focus on cybersecurity. And so for the past 24 years, that's been my field of choice. When I first saw this slide, there's a couple things that occurred to me. One is really about the different layers of defenses that we need. Networks, computer systems, very, very complex. One tool does not do it all, but no tools are perfect. And so it's important to make it difficult for attackers to get through multiple lines of defenses. It gives you more of an opportunity to detect, to deal with, to respond, and contain or eradicate an attacker or any kind of threat in your network. I like to think about an analogy of a castle, a fortress, where you're going to have moats, an outer wall, inner wall, towers for guards, watchmen, drawbridges, gates, flame-resistant building structures, all those things that aid to fortification. What the other thing that kind of struck me, and probably because it was listed first, is in firewalls. What we're talking about, innovation here is one of the main themes, and I have heard so many times in my career where people have used it more of an excuse of maybe doing something poorly. In the case of firewalls, I've heard people say, "Oh, well, that's a '90s technology, so it's okay that we're not doing very good in our firewall." But the reality is, when you're considering new technologies, it's important not to forget the old technologies as well. So many times, like segmentation has been a very well understood principle for many years, and you have companies who have neglected that for all that time. Or we see things like companies moving to the cloud, right? There's a lot of innovation there, but they didn't make the same decisions to insist on the same security controls they would have in their data center. So perhaps they don't have the same level of firewall in their cloud. And maybe at first it's justified because there's nothing important in their cloud. And then someone flips a switch and now that's where their production crown jewels are held. So it's important to, when you're innovating, to not just neglect the old technologies, which also innovate as well, like firewalls. I just had a conversation yesterday with a client. It was around segmentation, but in this case, we talked about micro-segmentation, and that's the direction that they're headed to make up from some limitations that their firewall and network design didn't account for. And of course, you could always put host-based firewalls. You could have done that 20 years ago, 25 years ago. However, new technologies, innovations with micro-segmentation makes it much easier and more capable to manage.
I can add, Philip, I think a big part of defense and depth and security too is you have to have controls in different layers. But I think what's more important is also realizing that there isn't a one-size-fits-all solution. And also, there may be a solution that works for someone else that may not be the right solution for you. So it's very critical to truly understand what business context is, what problem you're trying to solve, and find the appropriate solution, versus just saying, I need a firewall because a firewall is what everybody else has. Maybe you don't need a firewall just because everyone else has it. Maybe that's not what you need, right? Just because everyone else is building fire repellent homes, right? Maybe my home doesn't need to be fire repellent. I probably need to worry about flood protection because I'm in a flood zone, right? Then the other homes are not in a flood zone. So it's not a one size fits all. And also you can't always look at the industry and say, okay, they did it, so I need to do this too. It's all about understanding the context and making the right decision of what control you're implementing. And often a funny story to tie back to what Rob was saying is, in Rob's example, they implemented multi-factor authentication across the board. And that's just such a basic concept of authentication that really needs to be considered table stakes now to do the very, very basic hygiene of what you need to implement. There are still organizations that are not supporting multi-factor, or that don't have.
Unfortunately, there's a lot of them still not supporting multi-factor.
And that still baffles me, as people are trying to solve all these complex problems, but we still haven't addressed the very basics yet. So I think that's important to remember too, is you don't always have to go solve the biggest, scariest problem first. let's start with the basics and get there before we start going too crazy and making investments in areas where we may be too complex to even implement if you're not mature enough.
Yes, Nabil. Yeah, that's really important to remember that, despite this slide saying traditional, enhanced, next level, right? That understanding the context of what's really key to your business is important. And of course, there's a lot more tool sets than just what's listed here that may or may not apply. So this is the slide when I thought, okay, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. I'd heard that lots of times in my life, and I think it means, don't spend unnecessary effort changing something that's working. Maybe you'll make it worse. But when it comes to innovation, this is kind of flies at odds with innovation. That, okay, so how do you know whether something is broken? Maybe it's not optimal. And I think you guys probably help customers do that a lot, figuring out if something is not optimal or something's broken, that they may have no other way of knowing, or at least they don't know at the time.
Yeah, and if I can take the other perspective here, I think the intention of this bullet isn't not to innovate. I think the intention here is, don't try to go fix something or implement something yourself when existing solutions exist, right? Don't go build your own crypto because you don't need to, right? And you're probably going to get it wrong to begin with if you're trying to implement your own crypto. Don't try to, build your own CAPTCHA solution when there are existing ones that you can reuse that are proven and tested. I think that's what the spirit of this one was. If I had to guess, I didn't put the slide together, but if I had to guess, I think that's what it is. And but ultimately, it goes back to the context, right? What are you trying to solve for, and what are you trying to fix? What are you trying to implement? And that's more important than just saying in a blanket statement, right? Go do this. It's more about understanding the context and figuring out the right option.
Yeah, I think that's important. And with cybersecurity, it's not, very few things are obvious. It's not like you can look at like physical fortifications and you can see, hey, there's a hole right here that someone can crawl through, or they can get over the fence right here, or here's a blind spot. With cybersecurity, it's very esoteric. And so you have to spend a lot of effort looking at your defenses to determine whether they're broken or not, which is, one aspect of pen testing and some of the other tools and offerings that you guys provide for customers.
And a bigger challenge we see is often our customers ask us to test things in small chunks because that's how they're building it, that's how they're testing it, that's how they understand solutions, is in small parts and pieces. But you also still have to remember that testing things more holistically is important as well. Whenever I think of this concept, I remember the Mars rover lander, or Mars lander that failed the first time, where NASA did ridiculous amounts of testing to make sure everything worked correctly as intended. They did, but what they forgot was there were two parts to the lander. One part was telling the propulsion system how far to go down, and it was telling them the measurement in feet, and the propulsion system was taking the measurement in meters or something like that. And they tested them, everything worked great individually, but when you combine them together, when it got to Mars, that was the first time it was being used together, instead of going down like a few hundred feet, it went down a few hundred meters and just crashed into the surface. Kind of goes to show how testing systems holistically and understanding the overall impact is equally as important as testing them individually in its subcomponents.
That's a very good example. And I think we have to get into the Q&A really soon. But, one thing I'll just say about this current state of security, obviously, there's a lot of attacks going on. It's in our best interest to make it not easy for attackers. Unfortunately, some of the attacks are relatively easy for them. And that's just the state. The state isn't very good in that regards. And part of it's just because of neglect and not taking a proactive approach in our defenses. I think a few years ago, a lot of clients would say, well, we're not too worried about it because we're not a Fortune 500 or we're off the radar. I think most organizations are seeing now that that's changed, that anyone could be a potential target. Just kind of as a side note, I took my family to a concert this year. We went to see Smashing Pumpkins, And a couple weeks after I bought the tickets, I saw a news story where, hey, the band had their songs had been stolen by an attacker who threatened to release them to the public, and the rock band ended up paying a ransom. So it's like, it goes to show that really anyone needs to protect their assets. I think we're going to head into the QA now.
Yes, thanks, Philip and Nabil. Very great presentation from you both. And before we begin with today's Q&A, I'll just push through a few of these slides from Nabil and Philip. But again, everyone, before we begin with today's Q&A, please direct your attention to our webinar survey found at the bottom of the presentation window. Thank you all in advance for filling out the feedback form. Your participation in this survey allows us to better serve you all moving forward. And now on to the question and answer portion of our event. As a reminder, to participate in this Q&A, just type your question into the Q&A window located in the middle of your screen, or click the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. And if we are not able to answer all of the submitted questions during today's webinar, we'll be sure to share them with our speakers who can reply to each of you offline. And so our first question, I will direct this one to you, Nabil. You mentioned that there are 6 types of pen testing. If we had to start in one area, what would be your best advice?
It would be based on what you have, right? Understanding what you're trying to test and what it is that you do as a business that a testing is required. So if you're a company that is building web software, web applications, want to start in the application pen test. If you're building, I don't know, medical devices, you probably want to do an IoT test. So really it's context specific. Understanding what you're trying to test and why will probably drive a decision on what you want to start with if you haven't started testing things already. Often I would say it's, for a company that's relatively new and not as mature, your testing is typically driven by your customers' requirements. Or regulatory and compliance pressures. So that'll probably drive what type of test you need.
Very well said, Nabil. And the second question I will direct to you, Rob. We love the real world examples throughout your presentation. And also we want to give many thanks to all of the presenters for the examples that you all used. But thinking beyond some of the typical controls, how can we better prepare our employees to prevent real world attacks that target them, like social engineering, for example? Is training and awareness enough to combat that?
Well, I would say quickly that training and awareness are huge, but they're not enough. And I do think that there are a number of controls that we can put in place to try to help detect when someone has gotten a phishing email, or here lately they're using QR codes, so it's called quishing, or if it's a SMS text, it's called smishing. And so with those types of attacks, I think the training and awareness is really huge, because if we can communicate to all of our employees and our students and faculty that no one in management, no one in finance is ever going to say through a text message that I need you to buy some gift cards, or I need you to wire some money. That's never, ever going to be communicated through a text message. So if we can get that type of training across to everybody and make it clearly understandable, I think that will prevent a lot of the social engineering attacks that go on today.
If I can add to that too, Rob, I think it's also culture is more important than just awareness training. I think you have to harbor and build a culture of security across the board in order to be successful. If you have a culture that will naturally harbor people's interest in security, make them have more intimate understanding, curiosity, and also question things before they do certain actions, I think that culture is a key piece.
Very well said, Nabil. And that is all of the time that we have for questions today. So thank you, Rob, Nabil, and Philip. Information Week appreciates your time and expertise on today's topic. And again, any remaining questions, we will direct those to each of our speakers offline. We also like to thank our sponsor, NetSPI, as well as everyone in the audience. We really appreciate your attention and participation. Within the next 24 hours, you will receive a personalized follow-up email with details and a link to today's presentation on demand. Please feel free to invite your colleagues and peers who may have not been able to listen to the event to join us in the on-demand version of today's broadcast. This webinar is copyright 2023 by Informa. The presentation materials are owned by or copyrighted by Information Week and NetSPI, and the individual speakers are solely responsible for their content and their opinions. On behalf of our guests, NetSPI, I'm Brandon Taylor. Thanks for your time and have a great day.
Thank you.